Welcome to Everyday Ayurveda with Kate, a podcast that translates ancient wisdom for modern lives. I'm your host, Kate O'Donnell. I've been living and teaching Ayurveda, India's traditional medicine, for over 25 years, and I've authored 4 best-selling books on bringing Ayurveda practices into our lives. If you're tired of battling digestive issues, hormonal imbalances, menopause symptoms, or are seeking a deeper spiritual connection and purpose, you're in the right place. This podcast is for you, offering practical, accessible advice to help you heal through diet, optimize your daily routines, and enhance your overall well-being. Follow this space for insights on a diet that heals, strategies for better digestion, sleep, hormone health, and direction for finding a deep sense of meaning and purpose. Join me, my pod people, for this empowering journey into self-care and self-discovery. Together, we'll explore how to bring balance and vitality into your everyday life. Let's do this.
Hello, welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. I'm delighted to be here today with Kate O'Donnell. Kate and I are going to be discussing nutrition and cooking for the postpartum window, for times of high vata, for times of massive transition, and also kind of looking at the resiliency of the care provider, of those of us who are giving to other people, and how we can create practices that are simple, that help restore, just give us the care that we need to be able to give to others what we want to be giving to them. Kate is the author of 3 Ayurvedic cookbooks, including the Everyday Ayurveda Guide to Self-Care, the Everyday Ayurveda Cookbook, and Everyday Ayurvedic Cooking for a Calm, Clear Mind. And I think you have a new one on women's health here now as well. Kate's a nationally certified Ayurvedic practitioner and the founder of Ayurvedic Living Institute. She's traveled extensively in India and has studied the wisdom traditions of Ayurveda for over 20 years. Kate specializes in Ayurvedic education and cooking skills, cleansing programs, and professional trainings. And she's really here to help others come closer to their true nature and understanding themselves. So, Kate, it's such a pleasure to have you here in this conversation. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so I am just, of course, in this podcast, those of you who are listening know that this is really centered on the sacred window being this ultimate transition of becoming a parent after birth. But we're always reminded of how massive transitions are happening in our lives throughout in so many different ways. And what is so clear is that we are missing in the Western medical conversation the importance of changing our food, because food cannot be integrated in the same way at all times. And so just kind of opening up the dialogue on how digestion changes after birth. And yeah, let's just kind of start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also a lot of the protocols that are beneficial in the postpartum window are also things that I will recommend post antibiotics. It's a similar thing that happens to our digestive capacity when the body undergoes antibiotics, and also during times of grief or physical traumas, like accidents, surgeries, hospitalization. So for those listening who aren't in a postpartum window or close to people who are, I think this information is also really helpful for these other situations where, as you, Christine, say, high vata, so it's basically a situation where the wind of that vata dosha, which is this sort of combination of space and air, and the womb is space. And there's this huge movement that happens with, there was the holding of the fetus for all these months. And then there's sort of the pushing out. It's probably one of the biggest movements that vata undergoes during a lifetime. It's a huge deal. You could see also something like a hysterectomy having a similar effect, right? And in that, suddenly there's so much space that wasn't there before. And what we have to do is look at is how do we sort of bring this wind like back into its natural state of happiness, how it wants to be in your body. And it's a functional component of our body. So if the wind is moving in the wrong direction or moving at the wrong pace or with the wrong velocity, it causes problems, not only for female reproductive system, but also any movement process in the body. So any movement process where there's like a lot of wind, marshaled in a specific direction is going to cause this sort of, I call it a blowout. So the postpartum window is like we're recovering from an apana vata blowout. So that aspect of vata that governs below the waist. But you can see how sort of constipation or having something like a norovirus or food poisoning or something where you're having a blowout through the anus is also disturbing vata in that way, by changing sort of its velocity. So there's so many things that happen below the waist where, what's what I love about how we look at these things in Ayurveda is that, it's like this. You look at the functionality of what this wind is doing, and then everything makes sense according to that. So the things that we might do that are beneficial in one window of life may also come useful at another window of life, because the sort of causative factor of the problem is that change. So with birth, that's the big change that has happened, like physically in the body. So when we undergo those changes, like you use the word change around food, changing our food. So the body undergoes this physiological change. And then for us to expect that, let's say, 24 hours after giving birth, we're going to eat the same thing that we were eating when we were pregnant with that baby. Kind of, if you look at it commonsensically, it doesn't really make sense, right?
It doesn't make sense at all. But the thing of it is that unless we have been given the opportunity to understand a perspective such as Ayurveda, where everything that goes into our body with food is considered medicinal in a way, it will have a direct impact on the body. So when we're not given any of that information from our Western medical providers, and in the hospital, we're given a menu with kind of a slate of standard things for every person in the hospital, regardless of what they're going through, we can immediately start to experience all kinds of avoidable symptoms just because we didn't know that our digestion changed. And yeah, I love listening to you describe it as, these winds, because to me, it feels like, when we're settled, it's like all the leaves are kind of comfortably settled on the ground and this wind comes and they're all blowing around in the air, and we need to help them settle back down and reduce the power of that wind. Mm-hmm. And it's like grounding everything. So as we bring in nutrition, it's an opportunity to get really mindful. And, when I think about all the times where I might feel unsettled in just my mood, like what are the things that I do to help just calm me down? And it's kind of just as simple as beginning with a deep breath. And I like that about cooking for postpartum, is because it's actually like it starts out so simple. Like what the body needs is so simple. It's like paring back everything, all the complexities of tastes, and kind of just going from step one. So yeah, I love it. And I think for me, it was very mind-blowing to realize that no one had told me about that. No one told me what to do. So it wasn't until studying Ayurveda on my own, seeking that out, that I was like, oh, well, no wonder all these things were going wrong for me that first time, because I had no idea that I wasn't able to eat what I had eaten the day before. Because even though you're right, like it is common sense for me now, it wasn't at the time.
Sure. And I think, I use the example also of going through a round of antibiotics. We're not told, again, they tell you to eat yogurt or take probiotics during the course of the treatment. But when you take antibiotics, it kind of kills your digestive fire. It kills everything. the bad stuff and some of the good stuff too. So our microbiome is sort of like reduced to, like phase one. And so that's where simple food is so beneficial. So the commonality between the postpartum and the post antibiotic is that the digestive fire is very low. So as you said, we take it very simple. Because when birth happens, that downward flow of vata, it very much disturbs the flame of the stomach, so the digestion, small intestine, and the large intestine. Those all move in a downward direction, so everything goes from the mouth down the tube. So when as you point out, like the leaves are going up away from the ground, right? And they're blowing around. It's like the winds, they're sort of blowing in all these different directions for a period of time. And that's what causes the problems in the digestion. Is that natural downward movement of our food and our nutrition process, the absorption of the food, all of that sort of disturbed, right? It's swirling, let's say, instead of moving in its, trajectory that it usually does. So that's not happening post-antibiotic, but at the same time, the disturbance that the winds cause to the digestive fire is similar, to how we need to rehab the digestion after antibiotics. So although the causation's different, the reason the treatment is similar is because in both cases, our ability to digest complicated foods is just not there for a period of time. And Ayurveda's, as you said, like, where is this info when we need it most? Because it's very detailed. The Ayurvedic texts describe the sort of how to eat in the postpartum window. And it's very specific in this way that's quite refreshing. It's not all this different information coming from here, there, and everywhere. It's like, oh, here's the deal. So the winds are whacked. The digestive fire is low. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to ground those winds and get that downward moving function back into a healthy rhythm. And we're going to allow the digestive fire to build back up, which it will naturally do. We just need to kind of stay out of its way a little bit. And that's where I'm thinking about a friend of mine who had a baby a year ago, and people were, everyone brings you food. And she was like, I felt so bad because everyone was bringing all this food, but none of it was what I felt like I wanted to eat. She was craving khichdi. She was craving like the food that she learned about from doing like an Ayurvedic cleanse with me. So she's thinking, this is weird. I want cleanse food when I'm supposed to be nourishing. Because of course you think you're supposed to be nourishing and then you're going to be lactating. So of course we need all this food. But the thing to understand is that there's a lag time. In order to get that digestion back to the place where it's transmuting these heavier foods easily, cleanly, in a comfortable way that's not causing a lot of gas and bloating, digestive byproducts, discomfort. There's enough discomfort going on, I think, during a postpartum period than to also be adding, a lot of wind. So if I can just break it down, it's so simple that we start with, let's say, a rice gruel, a rice soup. So you take like a red rice, like a very nourishing variety of rice, and you put it with 8 parts water instead of your usual 2 to 1. We add some digestive spices like ginger, a little turmeric, cumin, or anything that comes out of the garden that also has like an oregano, a thyme. These spices also have those warming qualities, or sweet things like cinnamon, nutmeg. So we make this kind of a rice soup. And the idea is that you increase the thickness of the soup over the course of the first couple days. And that is how, regardless of the causation of digestive fire being low, that is how Ayurveda describes sort of rehabilitating digestion, is in this rice gruel, that increases in thickness. So that could be happening over the first day, 2 days, 3 days. I don't know what you find. It's probably different for everybody, right? Like how many days it takes people to crave a thicker kind of a soup with more ingredients.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the easiest way to do it is just ask somebody if you're cooking for them. And if it's you, you'll know when you're ready for something more. Your body will tell you, your appetite will tell you. But yeah, that for me, it's always so surprising personally. And when I cook for other people, it may be something that is like the most boring sounding food, but when it goes in your mouth at just the right time, you're like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I wanted. This is so good, because your body just knows yes, I can handle this. Yes, I can use this. And like you said, we're getting out of the body's way to building up its digestive fire again by not putting so much onto it that it's overwhelmed. It can't actually use it or process it. So yeah, it's beautiful. For me, we call it first day's rice pudding. I love the sweetness. I love the
Mhm.
sweetness of cinnamon and cardamom and, some maple syrup maybe. But yeah, for me, that sweet taste is what I really, really wanted.
Sure. Yeah. And it's just, I think those who have had to take antibiotics, in the recent past can picture this too, and think back to how that felt. Or somebody who's had a stomach flu, and then the first thing you want to eat is not lasagna. It's not a burger. It's just your body is like, ooh, no thanks. That's just too heavy. And it makes so much sense. And then, it might be Ayurveda would say that the digestion is sort of compromised a bit for a month or so. But it's really, I would say, that first week. And the same I say with the antibiotics, like 5 to 7 days, just like be on your game a little bit, about what you're eating and keep it really simple. And then as you start to feel like hungry for more, you can add in some mung beans or root vegetables, like sweet potatoes and beets. And those are such a great way to start to nourish the body in a way that's really like easy to digest. Where we come from a culture right now, Christine, where everybody's talking about meat and greens, right? Like that's the healthy diet, which for many people it is, especially people who have insulin difficulties, or difficulties breaking down carbs. So people are eating the meats and the greens. So what I see a lot of people doing is they're like healthy diet, end quote, meat and greens. So, whenever I don't feel right, that's what I should eat, like more greens and more meat, which that will be a fantastic and nourishing diet when we're ready, when the Agni, the digestive fire is ready for it. The thing that I just want people to know about is greens are actually very disturbing to the winds. And that I see a lot of people sort of get into some discomfort that way by overdoing the greenery. Because you think, of course, it's super amazing and nourishing and balancing. It's great for building the blood and optimizing the qualities of the blood and the skin. But greens are one of those sort of cautionary tales in the postpartum window in Ayurveda because they're light and they're bitter and they're cold. So a person could feel like if they eat a lot of greenery, like what used to be considered a healthy food, in this window of time, a salad, or a soup with lots of greens or a pile of kale, or all these things that we might crave when we're in sort of that normal state, going through life. But when you eat a lot of greens or you eat raw foods, it is going to cause the winds to be disturbed in the gut. And that can really add to the gas and the bloating and potentially almost a feeling of pain or constriction in the digestive tract, that's so not what we want, right? We want to feel like cozy down there in this window of time.
Right. Especially because, if we are nursing a baby, everything that we're experiencing in our own digestive system, we're probably going to see similar things in our baby. So to be able to, I think what you say is like, to me, it's about finding that balance. And I think that we're so smart, like our instincts are really very smart. So there's going to be times where someone is going to start to crave greens because
Yep.
maybe we had rice pudding for the last 4 days and we're like so
Right.
done with sweet taste. We are, just ready for that green. And so there's like, wait, that's what's beautiful about Ayurveda, right? Is that there's ways to introduce it and also mitigate some of the things that make it too bitter or too astringent or too aggravating to those winds. So, I love, being able to put it in a stew or a soup so that
Mhm.
maybe we've got some ghee or some good oils in there that are going to help balance that dryness that comes from bitter and astringent foods. And a little bit is it kind of goes a long way. We don't need to like pile on a huge plate of kale in order to start to experience and enjoy that sort of balancing flavor when we're feeling ready to bring in those greens again.
Right. Which you mentioned soups. That's the ideal food. That is the ideal food when the digestion is impaired. And those who eat meat can, again, as they start, as you say, crave it, they wait until the person's like kind of ready for it, wanting it. And then you put some meat in the soup. It's not like a huge chunk of meat just sitting on a plate. It's also mixed in, with the moisture, the water in the soup. And you can put greens in there or, put some rice in there and like make it, as you say, a balancing meal. So these sort of one pot meals, it's good news that the one pot meal is the ideal food.
It's good because it's simple. I think for those of us who are cooking for people, and I remember that too. You referenced your friend with, all those nice folks bringing over food. And I felt the same way. People were being so nice. And yet I was looking at these meals like, I don't want to eat that. I don't think that's actually going to be very good for me. The good news is that, before I had the baby, I like printed out my favorite recipes that I knew were going to be appropriate for me to eat. And, my husband, my mother, like they could do all those so easy because it's not difficult foods. So in that way, postpartum cooking after post-surgery, all of those times when hopefully we're not having to cook our own food, but even if we are, it's simple. It's easy, simple foods, warm, one pot soups, very flexible. I think that that's the piece that I want people to really feel comfort in is that, yes, Ayurveda has extensive information about foods that are good for us and not good for us based on what our constitution is. And I remember feeling overwhelmed by that when I first opened the very first book of Ayurvedic knowledge that I opened. I was definitely overwhelmed with the food pieces of it because I was looking at it very like over pizza brain, like, okay, well, this means that I can't have this and this and this. And I don't, after years of kind of living with this wisdom, I understand that it's give and take. There are times when this is going to be important for me to follow. And there's times where my body is resilient and my digestion is strong enough that I can have that and it's going to be okay. But really, during these specific times of high vata, we are getting as simple as can be with what we want to be taking in. And that's good news for people who might be overwhelmed by the process of cooking.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? I feel like the common thread that you and I are both sharing is when the true desire for that food is there in your body, then you're ready to eat it. So it's just, I think, a matter of having that simple stuff available so that if that's what you're gravitating towards, it's there. It's not just the heavy food that's in the house. I remember a friend of mine, her doula made her a cake. So she came home from hospital and there was a cake with like cream cheese frosting. I was like, oh my God. The last thing that I want my friend to eat right now is cream cheese frosting. It's just so heavy and cloying, and sticky. And it was just sitting there. The cake was just sitting there like day after. Finally, she was like, do you want that cake? I was like, yes, I want to eat it. I don't want you to eat it right now. But it was one of those moments where I was like, oh, we need the Ayurvedic doula here, bringing in the rice porridge and the mung bean soup, and the root vegetables and things like that are so just easy on the gut.
Right. And the good news is that people really are getting excited about realizing that there is this wisdom for the postpartum window when so much of what we need is not told to us by our medical providers. And so it's exciting to see this growth of awareness happening. I would love to hear from you, when you are working with someone who's, in a compromised digestive state, high vata, postpartum, what are those basic things you want them to have in their pantry or in their home or in their fridge?
Definitely the red rice, if they can find it. Like I have an Indian store near me that sells the Kerala red rice. That's the best kind. It's hulled. It's so the grain itself is soft. There isn't the husk on it, so it's not a brown rice, which again might feel confusing to people because we think brown rice is healthier, which in a normal state where we can digest fiber well, it would be. But really fibrous foods are going to be problematic, during this time. So if a person's craving vegetables, that's great. We just want to cook them. So I'll say one of the things I'm always recommending actually is like baby greens, like baby spinach and baby kale. And you could just take a handful and like wilt it into whatever it is you're making. So if it's a rice porridge and you want to go savory, you add a pinch of cumin, a pinch of ginger powder, and a handful of greens. And it adds, some color to the eye, a little more, like a little different flavor in the soup. So I'm sort of always all about those baby greens, especially the kale and the spinach are easy to find. But those who have like a greenhouse or a hoop house near them where they're producing baby greens all year, it's getting kind of easier and easier to find, that sort of thing. And of course, mung beans. So whether it's the green mung bean or the split with the skin removed, then you can make like a yellow dal soup. And again, more water than we usually use. That's like the name of the game, is to use more water than we're used to when we cook our legumes and our grains. And I'll talk about, of course, cumin and cinnamon. And like I might recommend somebody make one of my sweet spice mixes, or that's a great thing to have in your meal train, is somebody brings you a little container of cardamom, cinnamon, and ginger powder mixed together, because that can very easily be sort of sprinkled into a rice soup. Or even, everyone's like, what about oatmeal? I'm like, oatmeal can be a little sticky and heavy, but if we make it with extra water, and the person likes the oatmeal and that's a comforting food, then great. We just don't want it in that sort of sticky state, where it like sticks to the spoon. We want it to be more like a porridge. So any kind of grain, honestly, any kind of whole grain that is in a person's pantry can be made into something medicinal. And even a flour, like a whole grain flour. So one of the recipes in my everyday Ayurveda for women's health is a wheat soup. And that's one of the sort of traditional postpartum foods, where you take a wheat flour, not a crappy one, not the kind you make cakes with. But again, 10 years ago, I don't know I even would have had this conversation on this podcast about wheat flour. But now it's like you can find heirloom wheat that's been milled, somewhere in the state that you live in or in your region. And then it's more like the flours I see in India, it's like a whole grain and it's milled. So it's like a little bit heartier. So you toast the flour in a dry pan to cook it till it browns. And then you add a little water, a little ghee, your spices. Again, the sweet, like you were saying, Christine, you were craving something like, a maple syrup that's got like the minerals in it. Or a jaggery, like a sugarcane product. You put a little bit of that. You basically just mix it up and then you can serve it in a mug. That's so easy. So somebody's over, you're like, here, toast this flour, and if it's a good quality flour and you're making that soup with some spices and some sweet in it, fantastic. Or honey, like a local honey would just be so like flavorful in there. So I would like try to help people find, I feel like you probably notice this too, the sourcing, like where do we find foods that we feel good about, that we trust, so finding those heirloom varieties of wheat, not the kind of really adulterated ones. And so then we go from eating like a processed bread that comes in the bag and sits on your counter and doesn't go bad for months. We go from that to like actual wheat that's just, toasted in a pan. You add water, spices, and then you have this soup. And that's so easy, and so great. And I would be stocking up on sweet potato, yams, Japanese style yams. Those are really nice. They're really sweet. The ones with the purple outside and the yellow inside. I think beets can sometimes mobilize the digestion. So if a woman is kind of tending towards constipation, I would say let's get some more of the beets going on. And then all your porridges are pink, but it's fine. They taste good. And if a person tends towards the loose stool, I might say let's do less with the beets if they're having trouble sort of holding the nutrition in the colon. And I mean, we've got like daikon, radish, carrots, just so many roots. And I think depending on where a person lives, they have access to different kind of roots. But those are the things to like get stocked in your cellar And you start out by having them in these stews and soups, and then you can move into the place where, one of the recommendations I'll make a lot is like take a bunch of roots, rub them with oil, throw them on a pan and roast them. And then there you go. You can be eating those for a couple of days, if you're not able to cook every day. And somebody could bring you a bunch of like roasted roots, and there you go. You throw them in a pan, warm them up. I would say those are probably the main things. Maybe we'll start moving towards like some sweetened yogurt as the digestion comes back, like after a week or two, we might look for a fresh whole milk dairy yogurt. And then we add spices and sugar to it. There's a theme here, right? With the spices and the sugar. But those are the things that really get that digestion kind of back to a happy state. So I would say those are my top things. And then ginger, like ginger tea. Having some ginger tea in one's world. So even if it's just tea bags, or like that traditional medicinals, they make that one, I think they call it tummy tea or something. Like, ginger goes such a long way to getting the digestion back. It balances the vata, builds up the digestive fire. It's such a fantastic thing and tastes really good. So that can be going in all the soups, the stews, the porridges. Yeah. Anything else that you recommend that I didn't mention?
Well, I just loved listening to you. That flour, like cooking the flour in the pan, that sounds amazing. And I want to try that like today.
Yeah. You just have to eat it right away. That's the thing, because they're like clumps.
Yeah.
It's like, here you go, mom. Like, eat it in this mug now.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I think for me was really important. I tended towards anemia. So my blood needed building. And my favorite thing for that, especially because I loved the sweet taste and also the gingery, kind of the spice of the ginger, I would do stewed fruits. So like stewing raisins and prunes and dates, dried cherries, all of those dried fruits, just getting them cooking in water until they were extremely soupy, and adding things like cinnamon and ginger, cardamom, to that stewed fruit mixture was huge for me. And not only improving my elimination, which tended towards constipation for me for several days. So that was huge. Definitely, I liked the beets too. I think I waited maybe till week 2 or 3 to do the beets, but I love the roasted vegetables, especially when you get more into that second, third week and you're ready to not have soup for every single meal. You want a little diversity. But honestly, like broths for me, like all of those things could just be kind of doused in chicken broths, or for a long time I was vegetarian, so vegetable broth was easy to trade out. But bone broth is something we talk about a lot, especially for folks who are needing to build their blood postpartum, when they've lost a lot of blood, when they tend towards anemia anyway. Bone broth is really important and effective for helping to build that back up.
That strikes me as something that you could make for somebody and bring over, a couple quarts of bone broth. That's amazing, because that's probably the last thing a woman wants to do postpartum, is get out the pressure cooker and cook bones.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you mentioned earlier with the spice blends, I love encouraging people to, in their last trimester, get all those things set up ahead of time. Yeah. Get your spice blends, have them on the counter. We have, some staple herbal food preparations and teas that we encourage people to make ahead of time. So it's all there, so easy to put together once you've got it in its little bottle on the counter. But even the bone broth, we're not in Ayurveda, of course. Like ideally, we're eating freshly made foods all the time. But broth is something that I find is worth it to freeze and have it in your freezer so it's there and ready. And of course, if friends can bring more over to you, it's amazing. Another thing that I really love is milk tonics for postpartum. When we're taking in good quality milk, warming it up, bringing it to a gentle boil, turning off the heat, combining it with a little bit of ghee, our favorite spices, a little sweetener. That is, to me, like I just felt more able to nurse my children and have enough milk, because that was another thing that I struggled with, is being able to make enough milk that my babies needed, especially the first one, because I was pretty depleted with that postpartum window. So the milk tonics, the second time I had a postpartum window, made such a difference in being able to produce my own milk.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. That's one thing I did make for this friend who had the carrot cake. I came over the next day with a quart jar of dates and milk, spices and ghee. I blended it all up, poured it into into a jar. Yeah, and those kinds of things are great, and you can make in batches. And I do the conversation about freezing. I do recommend freezing things ahead of time. I think that's better than feeling bogged down or overwhelmed when you get into that window. So I know a lot of friends who make traditional sweets, milk sweets, so it's basically milk and jaggery and spices, and they sort of make that into all the shapes, freeze that, and have one every day. So it's like a part of. The other thing, I have a recipe in my self-care book for dates soaked in ghee with spices, and then you could just eat one of those dates every day and then kind of soak in the ghee, because ghee is one of those foods that is kind of huge in the postpartum window and is beneficial for rehabilitating digestive fire in general. So it's like as the appetite increases, we start to add more ghee. You go from like a little like a quarter teaspoon, and then we can increase that to where a woman's getting like a few tablespoons a day in the postpartum window. And I'll recommend the women make sort of like a 16-ounce jar, have several of those of ghee lined up, and keep it there where you can see it, because it'll remind you to add it to things. And you can see, I'll be like, I want this jar gone in 2 weeks. And then they'll be like, oops, I'm falling behind, because it's hard to eat that much ghee if you're not, used to it. But it goes into the milk tonic, it goes into the soups and the stews, and it's in everything, and it works like a lighter fluid for our digestion. So it's like that oil is actually the oil that the lamp is feeding on, and burning. So it's important. It's really important to get that good quality oil. And I think if a person's not able to get ghee or use ghee, they want to look for, what is the best oil available to them in their environment. Some people can get really good olive oil. The taste is totally different. It's going to be it's not going to work great in a milk tonic, but you can also use butter. Women can use butter in the postpartum window. It's just a little heavier, a little harder to digest. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really the point right there. And I think what to me, of course, like we cannot isolate the process of our digestion with how we feel in all the other systems of our body. So for me, when I think about those good fats, and I absolutely did make those huge jars of ghee to line up on my counter, and I did put them in vision so that I knew to use them all the time. But to me, it's like envisioning the sort of frayed, dried out, depleted nerve endings in my nervous system were just being smoothed down and coated by all of that good fat. And when I'm, sleep deprived from getting up multiple times at night, if, my clients are, feeling that sort of tenderness in their heart and in their mind, and overwhelmed by all the new things that we're trying to learn, maybe overwhelmed by visitors coming, maybe overwhelmed by the fact that we're not physically able to do the things that we normally would do. So our house might look like a mess. And for some people, that can be really difficult to be okay with. Having those good fats grounding the nervous system so that we can better not be knocked off course by all the things that are different, all the things that might feel harder, all the things that might feel confusing or overwhelming or even sad, all of these transitions and moving into a new phase of life. There's grief that goes along with joy. There's all kinds of spectrum that we are trying to navigate. And so to be able to move through those with some juiciness and some flexibility and resiliency, that to me is kind of the ultimate goal. So yes, like we're, talking about digestion, but this is immediately applicable to how we feel in our heart, how we feel in our minds, and how we're able to then be with our baby, be with our families, our partners. So it's food, and yet it's everything.
Right, right. And I love that you're sort of tying it together, how the nourishment of the body supports the nervous system and supports the heart, the mind and the emotions that are on a wild ride. And as we started talking about vata and the leaves being blowing around, and the winds of our body being swirling, it's like everything is literally swirling when there's a new life in the house. And as you say, people are coming or going. I mean, it's just so much to take in. And so this idea of stabilizing, I think really stabilizing the system, the body, to the best of our ability, because everything outside of the system is changing, and there's so much, as you point out, that's not in a person's control when there's a baby. Your sleep, even what you eat. We have this great conversation here about all the things, and then life starts rolling. And there's so many complications that I see women go through that make it really difficult to even just like move into the next room and get what you want to eat, So I think preparation, as you say, is huge. And one thing we haven't talked about is the external use of fat. I think that's sort of the last piece in this puzzle of stabilizing the system. And I also like to use that language of the frayed nerve tissue. And like I do imagine that. And when I feel like anxiety, I've got a lot of vata in my constitution and I push the envelope a lot. So I easily get like uncomfortable, moody and sad, like emotional. I'll very easily get into all sorts of swings in that way and feel really like I'm on a short fuse. And I picture the actual tissues in the body being frayed, being dried. And then when I take in something like ghee or milk tonic or a nice soup, it's like I really visualize the tissues soaking that in. And when we do the oil massage, which is another, huge part of the Ayurvedic postpartum routine, is like a daily oil massage for the mother, also for the baby. And it's easier when everyone's involved. Like you say, your aunt or your mom or someone is administering massage. But I have seen a lot of women be successful in getting this routine going. But when you put the oil on the outside of the body, the way that we do it in traditional oil massage, where you sort of take your time, you soak in it. It's like you're soaking in it. You're like stewing in it, And so again, the tissues are really absorbing that moisture in. And it's the antidote to anxiety in a physical sense. Of course, there's so much more to this picture, right? But I think for our conversation today, we are talking a lot about physicalities, and the nourishment of the body. So we nourish these tissues not only internally, but also externally. And I think if we come at it from those two angles, then you make a moisture sandwich, and that's what people need after giving birth. And once you wrap your head around that, like I want to be a moisture sandwich, for the next few months, then it's like, okay, I've got jars of ghee on the counter, I'm doing the oil with the shower. So when I get that time for the shower, there's also an additional however many minutes, 10 minutes, let's say, where I'm going to oil the body. And that's a part of my routine. And it's like parceled in. And then I think once a person understands, you probably see the same, Christine, once a person understands like how this works and feels it in their tissue, it becomes a lot easier to integrate it. It's when we're standing like off, we haven't passed through this gauntlet yet. And we're thinking, oh, you're reading about Ayurveda, and all the things it says you should do, but you haven't yet experienced yourself doing them. And it's totally overwhelming. You just feel like, oh my God, I can't do it. But once you do it, then you're doing it. And then it's happening. And I think it's our job, people like us, to really explain, and integrate these routines for people. And I think I'm guessing a big part of what you do, right? Do you have like a magic tip for those who are trying to integrate oil massage? Is there something you found to be really most helpful?
I don't know if it's a magic tip, but as I'm listening to you, yes, like we can learn all these things and we can take in all this information and it can just swirl around in our head as these theories. But when we go through the actions of doing it and we experience it in our own senses, then we know it from a different level. We know it from an embodied level. And, we can read and educate and take all the courses in the world, but it needs to be integrated by doing. And I can think of no better way to learn Ayurveda than to do it in our own bodies. So, for people who are, I mean, Abhyanga, putting oil on your skin is important for everybody, no matter what stage you're in. And what's so beautiful about it is that it supports your digestion as well as your nervous system and all the other systems. So we can see immediately how food and digestion and nervous system and all of it is so connected. And these practices that are thousands and thousands and thousands of years old were done because it's like a cycle. Everyone supports the next action, supporting this part of the body, and it's all like a beautiful, complete circle. But I can't think of any more important time to do these than when we're in a time of transition and compromise, because particularly with the sacred postpartum window, we call it the sacred window because it's this unique window of time that when we honor the wisdom and the needs of the body in the ways that we've talked about here, we literally just blow open this beautiful path, and the body will charge forward with the healing that it knows how to do in a way that's honestly more accelerated than at other times. It's almost like I was taught in Ayurveda school that it's almost like a reversal of the aging process in a way. It's this unique window of time that when we give the right care, the body and the senses, everything is like primed to respond to it. And, at other times of transition, we're just getting out of the way for the body to honor its own wisdom. So my only hot tip is just to get the oil on your body in whatever way works for you, and feel it and notice how it changes your skin, how it changes your feelings, how it changes your day, how it changes your sleep, how it changes the way you digest your food. But yeah, I'm all about this synergy of learning how to care for others through the process of doing it for ourselves. And this kind of leads into the idea of maintaining resiliency. Like, we no doubt are in, we're in pitta phase of life. We're in Vata Pitta world where, there's just a lot to hold, a lot to handle. And it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. Even if we're not a Vata constitution, it's very easy to become overwhelmed. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about and practicing and also teaching about, how can we as care providers, whether we're caring for families or elder relatives or clients, how can we maintain the resiliency within ourselves so that we have the discernment we want to have with them, we have the patience, we have the compassion, we have the resiliency to give what it is that we want to give. And so again, it's like coming full circle. It's like we're doing first and then we're teaching others. So yeah,
that makes so much sense. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Where I think the mind can often get into a circle of thinking that time caring for the self is time that's taken away from those that you're caring for. Whereas you're saying it's actually the fulcrum of the whole system, that the caregiver is caring for themselves first. And that is the place from which the prana flows right into the system. So if the caregiver is becoming depleted, the whole system becomes frayed.
Yeah. And there's something energetic that's there, I think. We talk in Ayurveda a lot about what's the energy that we're putting in the food. So we want to think about, of course, we talked about freshness and locale and trying to have the best ingredients possible to have that highest vibration, which in itself is medicine. But also, what are we bringing to it? If I'm like frantically trying to put food together, which, by the way, I have 4 kids and I'm there all the time. So I get it. But as much as I can, what can I put into this food? What can I put into this moment? How can I isolate this moment from all the other moments that are, I know that I have to be responsible for in the future, but kind of just bringing it into this presence, this moment now where I can give a moment of love or a prayer or a meditation or something that's like taking me back and, I believe becoming of more benefit to the person I'm cooking for.
Right. Which maybe we all need to focus on receiving nourishment ourselves. I feel like that's one of those things maybe we didn't learn or we forgot that is potentially more important than what's in the pot.
Yeah. And you have a whole book on self-care. And when you think about, people who are potentially, maybe they're doulas, maybe they're parents, maybe they're care providers, what do you think of, what comes to your mind as, or for you, maybe, what has been like a golden ticket for you that has given you the ability to be resilient in all the things that you want to be taking care of in your life?
The thing that I've noticed is, and this has been true for me always, like say I move a lot, I have moved a lot historically. And the first thing I do when I move is set up the kitchen. It's like the first boxes that are being unpacked, are the kitchen ones. And I have found that that which nourishes me is my relationship with food. Maybe not even the food itself, but my relationship with it. And so for me, the key is to be taking that time to nourish myself. So even though I don't spend a lot of time cooking, and anybody who's used my recipes can see they're pretty simple. That's kind of the name of the game. So it's not about like an elaborate thing. It's about, as you said just now, sort of showing up in that moment with presence for the nourishment. So whether it's a visualization of the food entering the tissues or just attuning my senses to the qualities of the food, that's the big one for me. If I'm sitting down and I'm like, my mind is just going here, there, and everywhere, I'm like, let us focus on this food right now. This is like the most bountiful, amazing gift. Like focus on it, feel it, smell it, taste it, so I put all my attention into it, the act of eating. And that to me has been the thing. So if I start to see that I'm not doing that, it's like amber alert, like because things will get worse from there. So that's the first thing that I look for in my life. If I'm not eating well, like if I'm not caring, or I'm being kind of, I don't know, lazy or, moving. Even when I travel, like I'll buy like the best dates I can find and sit down and eat that date. It's not like it has to be cooked food all the time. But that's the thing for me is that relationship with food it's the basis of my sort of, I would say, a sense of reality.
And I love how that food becomes so much more than just the food. It's like all of a sudden, it's impacting the way you feel, the way you think, the routine of your day, the pace. I feel like that is like a theme of this conversation of it's not just food, it's everything.
Right. Which is, I think it's important because it's very easy to just get in the digital mind about, best foods for postpartum. And that's what a lot of the space out there is offering. And then it's very easy to move forward thinking that if you check those boxes, you're doing it right. Whereas that Ayurveda, it's right from the beginning, it's teaching a relationship with the body and a relationship with substances, that which we take in, and also with energy, that which we surround ourselves with. And so, if we're going to kind of hone it down to the bottom line today, that's probably, I think we're both saying the same thing in that way. So the food for me and my work has always been the entry point to get people connecting to reality, to the nature of the body and the world that we live in and the way that we move within this world.
It's so beautiful because I do feel like when I entered into studying Ayurveda, what I discovered most was all the things about myself that I just hadn't been connected with for, 20 whatever years it was of growing up. I just hadn't been encouraged or taught to pay attention to most of the things that my body was doing. So it's so beautiful to me how close we can become with ourselves simply by paying attention and responding. And that's the gift of these ancient sciences. That's what they taught humanity. That was the gift. That was the wisdom that was passed from the universe to these, wise people who originally wrote this down and, thousands of years before it was written down. So it's about coming into knowing of ourselves. And as people going through a transition, whether it's postpartum, anything, to be able to know ourselves and have that autonomy to say, okay, this is what's going on and this is what I can do now because I know myself. That takes a feeling of being out of control to a feeling of being empowered.
That's a great point. I love how you've specialized in the sacred window. I think it's a fantastic moment in time where people are focused on integrating in this way. And I'm happy to connect and hear about what you do, and that I'm glad you offer it.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's, the work that you are doing, for everybody, but now in particular for women's health and food. And you are absolutely right. Food for so many people is the entry point. And I'm just delighted to be connected with you, Kate. This conversation is so beautiful, and I look forward to collaborating again in the future. You've got so much to share.
Let's do it.
Do you have any other tidbits that you're feeling called to share before we close our conversation?
I did want to mention that there is a list of recipes in the postpartum section of the Everyday Ayurveda Women's Health book that I had recommended to offer as a meal train suggestions. So just to make that easier, people can just kind of get this book and give it to whoever's cooking and just mark the pages, because there's a clear list of, let's say, 8 or 10 recipes that are ideal for that window. So it's all right there.
That is amazing. That is amazing, because let me tell you, friends and family want to help.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
Right.
Oftentimes, we need a little guidance.
Of course. Of course. Yeah.
Oh, Kate, thank you so much for all you do. This is a pleasure.
Likewise.